As the detectives positioned themselves, the tension in the air was palpable. This was the moment they would apprehend one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. In a frenzied display, he had started to kick off, his erratic behavior echoing around the corner. The narrative of this chilling case began 20 years earlier, on a game show that captivated millions. As John William Cooper discussed his unusual hobby, a seemingly charming facade masked the dark reality. Little did anyone know, this scuba diver was about to unleash a wave of horror with 2 brutal murders just weeks after his televised appearance. The shocking truth remained buried until a dedicated team of investigators reopened the case. They were determined to uncover the evidence that would unmask John William Cooper as a dangerous predator. To do this, they had to delve deeper into his psyche, understanding him better than he understood himself. Detectives soon realized they were up against a cunning psychopath, a man who thrived on manipulation and deceit. The battle of wits began as Cooper defiantly proclaimed, "I am not a murderer. I don't care whether you believe it or not. I am not a murderer." His vehement denial was just the beginning of a psychological game that would ensnare both him and the investigators. With the stakes higher than ever, the detectives understood the gravity of their task. Each moment counted, and they were racing against time, fully aware that if Cooper were to offend again, it could lead to more lives lost. The investigation took a dramatic turn as police footage from behind the scenes revealed the relentless pursuit of justice. The walls were closing in around Cooper, and with every new piece of evidence, the pressure mounted. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with lives hanging in the balance. Cooper's bizarre behavior and an unsettling sense of arrogance led him to believe he had evaded capture. But the detectives were closing in. The possibility of nailing their suspect before time slipped away loomed large. The chilling reality of Cooper's potential for further violence haunted the detectives. A single room held the key to unraveling the mystery, and as they prepared to confront him, they knew that each question could bring them closer to the truth, or push Cooper further into his psychological games. Pembrokeshire, Wales, known for its scenic beauty, was shattered in the 1980s by the horrific double murders of Richard and Helen Thomas. The tranquility of this safe community was upended when the siblings were discovered shot dead in their farmhouse, their lives extinguished in an act of savagery. The search for their killer stretched far beyond the borders of Pembrokeshire, reaching major cities like London, Wiltshire, and Liverpool. Years later, the brutal killings of Peter Dixon and his wife, Gwenda, in broad daylight on a popular coastal path, would add to the urgency of the investigation. The couple's murders were described by police as horrific, yet despite a massive manhunt, the perpetrator remained elusive. The trail had gone cold, and the case lay dormant until police decided to reopen the files nearly a decade later. With years separating the crime from the investigation, cracking these cold cases posed a significant challenge. As I sought to uncover the depths of this inquiry, I understood that every detail mattered, and the tapes of the suspect interviews became invaluable. These recordings provided a glimpse into the investigative process, revealing the painstaking efforts of detectives who refused to give up. They were determined to bring the truth to light, even when the evidence was scarce and memories had faded. In the shadows of a cold case, the relentless pursuit of justice continued. The detectives were equipped with the knowledge that understanding the mind of John William Cooper was not just an option. It was essential to prevent further tragedy. The investigation turned to the latest advancements in forensic science, as detectives sought to finally catch a serial killer who had haunted their community for decades. The weight of the unsolved violent crimes pressed heavily on them. These were heinous offenses, and the detectives were acutely aware of the families still yearning for justice, even after all these years. The urgency to find a resolution was palpable. With this burden of responsibility, they felt an overwhelming desire to deliver justice to those grieving families. After the alarm was raised, police discovered the couple's belongings still inside their tent, left undisturbed near the coastal path. Peter Dixon and his wife, Gwenda Dixon, had vanished since Thursday. Nearly a decade later, detectives returned to the murder site, intent on leveraging their local expertise to develop a new profile of the killer in the very location where the bodies were found. Before them lay the bodies, just inches away from a sheer cliff, dropping 200 feet to the rocks below. Gwenda's body was discovered just a few feet from the cliff's edge, partially clothed. Moments later, the grim discovery of Peter Dixon's body revealed he was tied up, his hands bound behind his back. Peter's lifeless form hung precariously over the cliff. He had been shot 3 times, once in the chest, once in the back, and finally, a fatal shot to the head. It was clear. The killer had lain in wait, ready to ambush. The perpetrator had a perfect vantage point along the coastal path. What motive could compel someone to come here unless they possessed local knowledge or a predetermined plan? The detectives were convinced the murderer hailed from the local area. They turned their attention back to unsolved crimes within the vicinity. In their search for clues, they scrutinized a series of brutal burglaries that had plagued this tranquil part of Wales. A disturbing pattern emerged as multiple violent robberies had occurred where women were attacked inside their homes. The excessive violence employed during these attacks raised alarm bells. Detectives recognized a chilling connection between these burglaries and the double murders they were investigating. Upon examining the modus operandi, it became evident that the assailant had targeted multiple victims, using a shotgun to control them alongside an attempted theft. When one set aside the murder aspect, the circumstances surrounding the offenses were strikingly similar. The man behind these brutal burglaries was none other than John William Cooper, a man already serving a prison sentence for his crimes, a sentence that had begun 9 years after the last murders. At 53 years old, John William Cooper was described as self-employed. He faced accusations of 16 burglaries and attempted burglaries in the Pembrokeshire areas of Milford Haven, Nayland, and Rosemarket. Eager for answers, the police delved into their evidence archives. They searched for any links to the burglar John William Cooper, and what they unearthed astonished them. A diverse range of stolen property had been recovered, including keys to various homes, each item telling a story of violation and fear. Nearby his home, discarded gloves were found, along with jewelry hidden in a hedge. These items were not just random artifacts. They were mementos of his offenses, sinister souvenirs that hinted at a darker reality. Investigators speculated that John William Cooper had been hoarding trophies from his crimes. Then, a significant breakthrough emerged. Hours of footage from their archives revealed John William Cooper being questioned by police after his arrest. The interrogation began, with detectives still pursuing a series of burglaries spanning from the 1980s well into the 1990s. Observing his body language, it became evident that he was disengaged from the interviewing officer, a telling sign of his defiance. He slumped in his seat, head bowed, a posture reminiscent of childlike defiance. The detective pressed, asking if he was prepared to explain how a particular necklace had come into his possession. This was a critical opportunity to probe deeper into the psyche of a violent burglar, who may also have been a serial killer. Detectives questioned whether the items recovered from his bedroom belonged to the victims. They sought an explanation from him, hoping the police tapes would unlock the mystery of a murder case that had haunted them for 2 decades. The footage was a treasure trove of potential clues. Witness accounts described his bizarre behavior, marked by a destructive avoidance technique. He would sit with his fingers in his ears, a manifestation of his need for control, as noted by his nephew. Detectives soon realized that while John William Cooper appeared to be a family man, fiercely loyal to his wife and children, there lurked a sinister side. He prowled the fields at night, cutting fences to gain entry. John William Cooper was a man of duality. While he presented himself as a devoted family man, beneath that facade lay a predator. He lay in wait, surveilling homes before striking. In one horrifying encounter, he hurled a television at a victim's head, kicked them mercilessly, and bound them, returning repeatedly to inflict further assaults. He wielded his gun with brutal force, clearly relishing the chaos he created. Detectives began to suspect that John William Cooper's violent crimes and his behavior in custody aligned with the profile of a murderer. Yet, they needed more concrete evidence. In the cold case files, they stumbled upon a wanted poster featuring a man who had used one of the victim's cash point cards just hours after the murders. A witness recalled vividly the artist's impression poster displayed in the bus shelter of their village, sparking conversations among friends. They whispered in disbelief, "Oh my lord, there's someone living around here who's done these things." The police were now faced with a daunting question. Could the mystery man possibly be John William Cooper? It was crucial to obtain an image of him from around the time of the Dixons' murder, allowing for a comparison with the artist's impression that had been created. In 1989, the detectives made an extraordinary discovery, coinciding with the year of one of the double murders. Their prime suspect had once appeared as a contestant on the popular game show Bullseye. In a seemingly innocuous exchange, John William Cooper spoke of his unusual hobby. "You've got an unusual hobby, John?" the host asked. "Oh yes, the scuba diving," he replied, his enthusiasm evident. "The scuba diving?" the host pressed. Cooper continued. "Well, apparently it's the place to do it down there." "Isn't it?" the host responded, prompting Cooper to elaborate. "Oh, we've got coastline because is it the mountains that are sort of inverted? And you've got all these, well, we've got deep water where you can sort of swim over mountains and all sorts, yeah. We hope you all have a good night with this. Give them a round of applause." Just 3 weeks after this episode aired, Peter and Gwenda Dixon were shot dead along a coastal path, a chilling coincidence that would haunt the investigation. "You've got £220. What are you going to do? You'd like to gamble?" the host inquired, oblivious to the dark shadow looming over Cooper's past. The detectives managed to freeze a frame of John William Cooper that mirrored the artist's impression almost perfectly. For the lead investigator, it felt like tracing a sinister outline. The way he stood, his build, the scraggly hair that hung shoulder-length, the unkempt appearance, and his mustache were all striking. As the investigating officer presented the evidence to his team, the gravity of the moment was palpable. In a moment of raw revelation, his response was stark. "Fucking hell, it's him." 18 months into the cold case investigation of 2 brutal double murders, the police were grappling with the weight of the evidence. Their prime suspect, John William Cooper, was already serving time for violent robbery. With Cooper nearing the end of his 16-year sentence, time was of the essence. The police needed to act swiftly to secure their case against him before his imminent release. They devised an audacious plan, understanding they were potentially dealing with someone responsible for 4 murders. "This is a person who has no compulsion at all in using excessive violence," one detective noted, acknowledging the daunting task ahead. "We needed to get him talking. We needed to listen for anything that would give us a clue, something that would make us ask, why did he say that?" In a bold move that could define the investigation, the team was granted just 4 days to interview the man they suspected of being a psychopath and a serial killer. A watertight strategy was essential for their success. This is a person who, without having to say very much, can intimidate simply through his physical presence or his look, the lead detective explained. "I needed to ensure we had officers who would not be intimidated." Gareth, affectionately known as Rambo, was a rugby player known for his toughness. Louise, a skilled interviewer, was someone who could maintain focus under pressure. Cooper had previously refused to speak during past interrogations, so the detectives meticulously studied the police tapes they had obtained. Each detail was crucial in preparing for the confrontation that lay ahead. In a relentless pursuit for the truth, the police aimed to uncover the key that would make John William Cooper talk. They needed to understand him better than he understood himself. He was no mastermind, but his crimes would reveal much about his psyche. Investigators meticulously re-examined the burglaries committed by Cooper, searching for connections that might link them to the unsolved murders haunting the community. Among those interviewed were John and Marie, residents who lived less than a mile from Cooper's territory. They recalled the unsettling events that unfolded, detailing the homes he had targeted. 2 down the lane, John recalled, a sense of dread creeping into his voice. There was the one on the corner, the next door but one, and the top one, twice. Each mention of a familiar location echoed with the weight of fear and anxiety. The horror escalated as Cooper, clad in a balaclava, confronted John at gunpoint during an attempted robbery. "Tell me what happened that night," the detectives pressed. John recalled. He closed the door. The show was stopped. With a gun leveled at him, Cooper ordered John back. "Go back or I'll shoot you," he demanded. John complied, but the image of the woman, bound and terrified, ignited a fury within him. "What did you feel at that moment?" the detectives inquired. "When I saw the state the woman was in, it made me really angry. She still had the rope on her wrist." "Do you think you had a lucky escape that night?" they asked. "I did. I feel I did, yes," John replied, a mixture of relief and trauma shadowing his words. As Cooper was brought in for questioning about the murders, The police strategized. They aimed to exploit his history of targeting women, introducing a female officer to gauge his reaction. It was a gamble that could either yield significant breakthroughs or lead to a disastrous confrontation. When Cooper entered the interrogation room, the detectives noted his imposing presence. He was a well-built, athletic 60-year-old, exuding confidence. Yet his sharp gaze swept the room, revealing a man who was calculating his next move. 6 months of study and strategic planning had led to this moment. The weight of the investigation rested heavily on this initial meeting. As the lead detective stepped into the room, thoughts raced through his mind. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel that pressure," he later admitted. Gathering his composure, he engaged in an internal dialogue to steady himself. This was not just a man. He was a perpetrator of heinous crimes, sitting just feet away. What struck the detective were Cooper's piercing eyes, which seemed to assess him as much as he assessed Cooper. It was a silent battle of wits, a duel of glances, revealing the tension hanging thick in the air. As the interview commenced, the detective requested, "Can you please state your full name and date of birth?" Cooper responded, "John William Cooper, the 3rd of September, 1944. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation as the detective introduced himself and his colleague, faced with the man they believed was a serial killer. "Can you please state your full name and date of birth?" The detective repeated, the words heavy with expectation. "John William Cooper, the 3rd of September, 1944, Cooper replied once more. The detectives braced themselves, standing before a man they suspected of taking 4 lives. However, when pressed for further details, Cooper's response was curt. No comment. A palpable tension enveloped the investigation team as they braced for the direction these interviews would take. Under the guise of a simple inquiry, the detective probed John William Cooper about his character. He asked, "How do you describe yourself in your book?" Cooper, with an unsettling calmness, replied that he was a helpful person, raised to assist others. At 64 years old, he presented an image of benevolence, but the shadows of his past loomed large. In his narrative, Cooper painted himself as someone who embodies respect and kindness, a man who believes in the virtue of helping others. Yet, beneath this facade, a darker game was afoot. The detectives, keenly aware of his psychological profile, recognized that the real interrogation had just begun, leaving the initial nerves behind like discarded clothing. As the detective continued, he sensed that the atmosphere had shifted. The police strategy was to flatter Cooper's ego, allowing him to feel comfortable in the conversation. He proclaimed himself the most positive person, capable of evolving even in the bleakest of circumstances, clinging to the notion that even in darkness there could be a glimmer of light. Yet as the interview wore on, Cooper began to relax, perhaps too much. A troubling arrogance surfaced. It was as if he believed he could manipulate the situation, convinced that somehow he had escaped the consequences of his actions. Now that the police had unlocked his tongue, they pressed for details about the very crimes they suspected him of committing. However, they quickly discovered that Cooper had devised his own strategy, a web of denial and deflection. The lead detective confronted him directly, stating, "We're investigating offenses in which the use of a shotgun is evident. What can you tell me about that?" The response was perplexing. Cooper danced around the questions, carefully assessing their implications. He seemed to understand the game being played, responding with calculated remarks. "Yes, you're investigating. I might be beside the point, but you're looking into incidents involving a shotgun?" His evasiveness was as striking as it was disconcerting. The detectives pressed on. "Can you tell me about any shotguns you had in your possession in 1989? Cooper flatly denied ever having owned one. "What can you tell me about shotguns you had access to at that time?" Again, he responded with a curt, "None." The tension in the room thickened. "Is he playing a psychological game with you?" One detective pondered aloud. Yes, Cooper was keenly aware of their tactics, striving to stay one step ahead, always probing for weaknesses in their approach. He adapted with each inquiry, crafting his narrative as if it were a shield. "Were you the person responsible for shooting Peter Dixon?" The answer came swiftly. "No, not me." The detectives pressed further, questioning his involvement in any related activities. "Did you reload a shotgun at that location?" "No, not me." The implications of each question weighed heavily in the air. "Can you explain whether you concealed bodies using branches and undergrowth?" His response remained unchanged. "No, it wasn't me." Cooper's denials rang hollow, echoing through the dimly lit room. The detective's mind raced as the interrogation unfolded. The evidence was mounting, and with each denial, he felt an unsettling certainty settle in. This was a man capable of unspeakable violence. As the interview progressed, the detectives grew increasingly convinced of Cooper's guilt. This was not just a man. He was a predator, skilled in the art of deception, and the weight of his horrific past threatened to resurface at any moment. With every denial, the reality of Cooper's actions loomed larger. The detectives were faced with a chilling realization. They were in the presence of someone who had committed horrendous acts, someone skilled in evasion, yet undeniably guilty. The detectives were resolute in their mission to expose John William Cooper's web of deception. Over the course of 4 painstaking days, they meticulously combed through the evidence, their focus sharpened on a crucial piece, a gun discovered near Cooper's home after his arrest for burglary. They were convinced this weapon belonged to him. When confronted with the firearm, Cooper feigned ignorance. He examined the gun, its surface slightly rusted, and asked, "Is that a single barrel?" His evasive responses only deepened the detective's suspicions. "Have you ever seen this before?" he was asked, to which he replied with uncertainty, "I don't know." Throughout the interviews, Cooper scribbled notes, a behavior that caught the attention of the detectives. One investigator recalled a moment of realization, thinking, "Why is he writing that? There must be something significant about it. What is it about this gun that seems to unnerve him?" As the interrogation continued, he was taken out of the interview room. "Which shed are you referring to?" came the probing question. "The garden shed, alongside the hedge," he responded, suggesting a calculated effort to steer the conversation. "Which hedge did you find the gun in?" This question seemed to stymie him momentarily, as if giving himself time to think. "What do you think he was worried about?" The investigator pondered. It was likely that Cooper feared the advancements in forensic technology would unravel the truth. As the questioning intensified, Cooper's nervousness became palpable. "Which hedge did you find the gun in?" Again he stammered, possibly buying time. The detectives theorized that he was anxious about what the forensic team might uncover. If the gun was still in their possession, further forensic analysis could yield vital evidence. For the detectives, this was a pivotal moment. Cooper's anxiety raised a critical question. Why was he so concerned about that gun? It dawned on them. They may have identified the murder weapon. However, with Cooper denying ownership of the firearm, detectives faced a daunting challenge in linking him to the weapon. The gun had been examined in the forensics lab upon its discovery, yet no connections to Cooper or the murders had emerged. The lead investigator's mind raced with worry. What had they overlooked? The firearm had undergone extensive testing at the lab, possibly retaining traces of DNA. It had been a decade since its last examination. What further steps could they take? They could only hope that advancements in forensic science could now provide the evidence needed to prove Cooper's guilt. Was John William Cooper aware of the forensic capabilities that could incriminate him? The detectives believed he was not only cautious but also cunning. He had committed his crimes while gloved and masked, leaving no fingerprints or DNA behind. The detectives felt like they were searching for a golden nugget of evidence, something tangible that would lead them to the man responsible for the heinous acts. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on them. John Cooper's sentence for burglary was nearing its end, and he would soon return to his family, his wife, Pat, and their children. The police felt powerless to intervene. They learned that Pat was deeply uncomfortable with her husband's imminent release, yet she had no say in the matter. It was troubling to know he was reassuring her about their future together, speaking of love while darkness lingered over his past actions. Time was slipping away. Cooper had shown no signs of remorse, refusing to acknowledge his wrongdoings. The detectives braced themselves for the possibility that if he returned to his old ways, he might kill again. In a close-knit community, the members often share more than just geography. They share a history, a bond that runs deep. This was the case for one investigator, who found himself intimately connected to the very village where John William Cooper had been released. It was the village where he had been born and raised, a place filled with family and friends, now overshadowed by the presence of a man with a dark past. With friends and family still living in that area, the investigator felt a creeping anxiety. The knowledge that Cooper, the man who had once terrorized their community, was back among them weighed heavily on his mind. Just 2 months after his release from prison, the grim reality of Cooper's return would soon unfold. It began with a phone call received by Detective Steve Wilkins, a call that would change everything. In the dead of night, while fighting the haze of sleep, Steve Wilkins answered a call from the control room. The voice on the other end belonged to a control inspector, who delivered a chilling message. "Boss, are you on call tonight?" With a simple affirmation, the gravity of the situation became apparent. "We've just had a call from John Cooper. His wife's dead. We think he murdered her." This revelation sent shockwaves through the department. Police tapes would later reveal the struggle detectives faced. Despite hours of intense interrogation, they remained unable to pin down the man they suspected of 4 murders. Now, with his wife's death, the stakes had escalated dramatically. Cooper's account was disconcertingly calm. He professed that he had gone to bed with his wife after a pleasant evening, only to be awakened by her gasping for breath. He claimed he had attempted to revive her, but it was too late. His narrative was compelling, almost too believable for comfort. Yet the investigator knew who he was dealing with, a man who had already taken 4 lives without remorse. The investigator reflected on the dynamics of Cooper's life. He had a seemingly happy home, yet he was a man with blood on his hands. Pat, John Cooper's wife, had been with him since they were mere teenagers, standing by him even as he served time for his heinous crimes. But the police were acutely aware that her fears about his release had been mounting, and now they faced a pressing question. The investigator turned to the pathologist, desperate for clarity. "I want to know," he urged. "Did he kill her, or did she die of natural causes?" He implored the pathologist not to hedge his bets. When the results came back, they were startling. The pathologist reported that Pat's heart was the size of a football, confirming that she had indeed died of natural causes. Pat Cooper had remained steadfast by her husband's side throughout his prison sentence. Yet the police were acutely aware of the dread that loomed over her as his release approached. In a moment of desperation, she turned to the pathologist, pleading for clarity. "I need to know," she insisted. "Did he kill her, or did she die of natural causes?" Cooper was back in the very community he had once terrorized, a place where fear lingered in the shadows. The police were convinced he was a serial killer, yet with no solid evidence, they were powerless to act. Detective Steve Wilkins felt the weight of this uncertainty pressing down on him. As a resident of the area, raising his children and now his grandchildren, he couldn't shake the thought, what if a serial killer is living among us? The pressure mounted as the forensic budget soared to nearly £1 million, and still, results remained elusive. John William Cooper was once again among the community he had menaced for years. The police were convinced he was a serial killer, yet the absence of tangible evidence left them powerless and unable to act. Tension hung in the air, as the detectives felt the immense pressure of the case weighing down on them. The stakes were high and the pressure was palpable. The hunt for the truth continued, but time was running out. In this dark tale of murder and deception, the fight to bring justice to the victims was far from over. In a moment of desperation and frustration, lead detective Steve Wilkins summoned Angela Gallup, the head of forensics, to discuss the case. As Angela Gallup arrived to meet with Steve Wilkins and his team, she was struck by the atmosphere that enveloped the room. It was charged with tension, intense, yet lively in its own right. Wilkins confronted her directly, revealing his concern. "You've had this case for 18 months, he said, "and we've yet to uncover anything substantial. We're considering transferring the case to another team." To an experienced investigator, certain behaviors raise immediate alarm bells. As the urgency of the case pressed upon us, I felt compelled to convince the chief that we were far from reaching the end of our investigative road. With determination, I persuaded him not only to keep the case assigned to our team, but also to allow us to embark on forensic textile fiber analysis. Faced with a daunting array of evidence, we had to make critical decisions on what to test. We focused on clothing that matched the potential attire of the murderer. Among the items sent for analysis was a pair of shorts, and it turned out to be the breakthrough we had desperately sought. As we examined the fabric, a minuscule fragment caught our attention. It bore the unmistakable signs of blood. With a sense of urgency, I initiated DNA profiling and reached out to Steve Wilkins. I shared my excitement, saying, "Steve, you're going to want to hear this." I continued, "It's all right, I'm using hands-free." But Steve insisted, "No, pull over." As I parked the car, I could feel the weight of the moment. He said, "You know that golden nugget? We got it." The revelation was staggering. We found a blood flake on the shorts, and it matches Peter Dixon's. In my excitement, I pounded my hands on the steering wheel, tears welling in my eyes as the weight of the discovery hit me. It was a profoundly emotional moment. The odds of such a match were astronomical, 1 in a billion. This was the missing link we had been searching for. It was our golden nugget. We now had the blood of a victim on a pair of shorts discovered in John William Cooper's home. These shorts were identical to those described in the artist's impression, which ominously included the phrase, "Got the bastard." That speck of blood was the damning evidence the police had so desperately needed. Just 3 years after reopening the cold case, John William Cooper was finally arrested for murder. His reaction was explosive. As detectives cornered him, they had a mere 24 hours to interrogate and charge Cooper. If he confessed to owning the shorts, it would create an undeniable link to the victims. A murder conviction was now within reach. The detectives approached the interview carefully, initially steering the conversation toward his boots. "Would you have owned boots that matched the description from 1989, the year Gwen and Peter Dixon were murdered?" they asked. "Possibly," he replied. "I always had tough black working boots." The detectives pressed on. "Can you see this pair of shorts? Are they yours?" His response hinted at acceptance. If they were in the house, most probably yes. While the conversation danced around the subject of boots and socks, we were laser-focused on those shorts. It felt like a silent victory, an unspoken high five beneath the table, as we recognized the significance of what he had just admitted. By withholding the revelation of the victim's blood found on the shorts, the police had cunningly ensnared John William Cooper in a web of his own making. He now claimed ownership of the shorts, yet insisted they differed from the artist's impression. In a moment of apparent bravado, he led investigators to a supposed breakthrough. He insisted, "Those are long-legged shorts," asserting that they were distinct from the ones depicted by the artist, claiming they were longer. His insistence became almost mocking, as if he were taunting the detectives. "Don't be silly," he proclaimed. "These are different shorts. These are short shorts. They're long shorts." The detectives noted the smug expression on his face, a mask of false confidence. "But they're short shorts, John," they pressed, pointing to the artist's impression. "GDR2 has long-legged shorts, which I would call him. The photographic evidence shows shorts that are not short-legged, but rather long-legged." "Bathing-type shorts," he insisted. It became increasingly evident that as Cooper elaborated on the differences, he inadvertently acknowledged the shorts as his own. With each word, the layers of deception peeled back, revealing a darker truth. Investigators recalled that Cooper's wife was a seamstress, leading them to the next logical step, to unpick the hem of the shorts. In doing so, they recovered DNA material that matched that of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. Despite there being no link between Cooper and the murdered couple's daughter, the DNA evidence irrefutably proved that the shorts originally belonged to the Dixons. But those shorts were taken by Cooper as trophies, souvenirs from his heinous acts after he had murdered Peter and Gwenda. Here was a man who flaunted his trophies, believing he could escape not only the murders but also the audacity of wearing the clothing of his victims. As the police prepared to confront Cooper with this damning evidence, they felt the walls closing in around him. "Do you have any explanation as to how that blood could have innocently appeared on the shorts?" they asked. Cooper feigned ignorance, stating, "I really do not know. As I said, my wife sourced the shorts." But faced with the forensic evidence, he began to distance himself from the truth. The detectives were taken aback by the extent of Cooper's denial when cornered by undeniable facts. More troubling was his comment about his son, revealing a troubling dynamic. "My son used to take my clothes whenever he wanted," he said, his tone hinting at a deeper concern. "That would be more of a worry for a father. He could take whatever he wanted, whatever he needed." This statement raised eyebrows, suggesting there might be something suspicious about his son's behavior. When questioned about his implications, Cooper quickly backtracked, denying he was suggesting his son had committed these offenses. Yet it was evident that his words hinted at a darker narrative. As the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear to the detectives that they were tightening the net around him. "Definitely," one investigator remarked. "Some of his explanations are becoming far-fetched and rather ludicrous." Aaron Cooper harbored a troubling belief that everything on this planet belonged to him if he desired it. His reference to his son was always formal, always using his full name, Adrian Cooper. This distant manner, tinged with coldness, spoke volumes about their fractured relationship. In a moment of frustration, he shouted often, attributing his son's behavior to his own parenting. In his claims, he vehemently denied ever laying a hand on Adrian, despite what his son might assert. However, detectives had already interviewed Adrian, who recounted a lifetime marred by terror, inflicted by his father's violent and deceitful nature. "When I was 9, Adrian recalled, that was the first time my father turned violent. He described how his father would approach him in a rage, frothing at the mouth, with bulging eyes that betrayed his fury. In a chilling recount, Adrian detailed how John Cooper would expand his frame, clench his fists, and assault him as if he were a mere toy. He would slam Adrian against door frames, tossing him around with a casual cruelty, as if he were nothing more than a doll. While everyone else seemed oblivious, engrossed in social gatherings at the pub, Adrian lived in a shadow of fear cast by the memories of his father. The terror of John Cooper haunted him throughout his childhood, shaping his existence in unimaginable ways. The darkness of John Cooper's actions extended beyond his son. He had brutally killed their family dog, digging a pit and bludgeoning the animal to death with a shovel. Such glimpses into his violent behavior emerged as witnesses began to come forward. The fear that John instilled in his family permeated their home for years, a constant reminder of the monster lurking behind the facade. Eventually, John Cooper's arrogance led forensic experts to uncover evidence that linked him to a series of brutal murders. He believed he had successfully evaded justice, yet the net was tightening around him. The latest forensic results had provided investigators with compelling evidence against him. When confronted with the mounting evidence, John Cooper maintained his defiance, arrogantly proclaiming his innocence. It became evident to the detectives that he had a pattern. Whenever faced with the truth, he always redirected blame, insisting there was someone else to hold accountable. "There's always someone else," the lead detective pointed out. "Someone else who's a liar, someone else who's a criminal. But everything my colleague has presented today always leads back to you. That's why you are here today, isn't it? Because you refuse to accept responsibility." He continued, "Forget about Adrian Cooper. Forget about everyone else. You are the one we are examining. It's incredibly frustrating. We keep going in circles, and it always returns to you. You've been trying to manipulate the facts to fit your narrative." Despite his attempts to maintain composure, a flicker of the real John Cooper surfaced. "You and your colleagues choose not to believe this evidence and look elsewhere," he asserted, revealing the mounting pressure he faced. "I'm fed up with being labeled a liar," he complained. "I'm trying to help you. This investigation has spanned several years, yet the facts remain undeniable. The only person we haven't been able to eliminate from this investigation, the name that keeps surfacing, be it through forensic evidence or testimonies, is you. I see your defenses, but that's all you seem to focus on." At just 17 years old, the interviews came to a close and the tape recorder was switched off. Yet, while the questioning had ended, the forensic team continued their relentless quest for truth, meticulously re-examining a gun in a desperate attempt to identify the murder weapon. The investigators were drawn to the bag that held the gun. At the bottom, they discovered flakes of black paint, an intriguing clue. The barrels had been coated in black, and the paint had begun to flake away. Caught in the light, the flakes revealed a startling reddish hue. For forensic scientists, anything red often signals a potential connection to blood, stirring a sense of urgency within the investigation. Quickly, they conducted tests, and to their astonishment, they confirmed the presence of blood. Both the paint flakes and the stains on the gun barrels matched the DNA of Peter Dixon, solidifying the weapon's role in the crime. This blood evidence proved that the gun was indeed the murder weapon. Moreover, an innovative forensic technique uncovered fibers on one of John William Cooper's gloves, linking them to a sock worn by the murder victim. The victim, Richard Thomas, had been a part of a tragic story that had remained unresolved for over 2 decades. John William Cooper emerged as a notorious figure, a manipulator who thrived on the thrill of the game, always believing he was one step ahead of law enforcement. Yet, in a twist of fate, the forensic evidence became his undoing. His arrogance led him to believe he was invulnerable, but it was precisely that arrogance that sealed his fate. By painting the gun's barrels, he thought he could obscure the evidence from the crime scene. However, for the detectives, there was no escape. 24 years had passed since the brutal murders of Richard and Helen Thomas, and 20 years had gone by since the tragic deaths of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. Thanks to the meticulous combination of forensic investigation and strategic interrogation, the cold case that had haunted the community was finally ready to be closed. John William Cooper was brought to trial for murder, granting the families a much-needed sense of closure. It was only that evening, in the solitude of my own home, that I grasped the magnitude of being part of this investigation and this dedicated team. The memories from this case would linger with me throughout my career. After years of involvement, I found myself descending from the 20th floor to the ground level, fully aware that I would not return. It was finally over. This team was unlike any other, marked by profound personal commitment. It had been hailed as one of the most significant investigations in the annals of British policing.